MIDP. I'm Nami, I'm chairing this round. She, her pronouns will please address the panel as a whole. I want the rest of the panelists to just introduce themselves in this order, I guess. Speakers, please feel free to introduce yourselves and give any preferred pronouns if you feel comfortable sharing them before your speech. And with that, on the motion that this House prefers a world with access to a pill that permanently removes your ability to feel strong or intense emotions, I would like to invite the Prime Minister to open the case for government.
Check. Okay. Before I start, as always, shout out to Indonesian debating community. Once again, we made it, and hopefully my last speech as IT landing student will not disappoint. Anyway, pronouns will be datum. Session will be here. Okay. Severe emotion leave my grandmother neglecting me. Every day she want to end her life, crying endlessly in her bedroom. We think that giving access to live out and opt out from this severe emotion is inherently crucial for humans to move on, develop themselves, or even to some extent experience life to the fullest. With that, opening government proposed 3 sides of setup. Number 1, I think this motion assumes via that everyone can access this. This means like things like mass production, etc. I don't want opposition to come to the debate and say this is only accessible for the rich. Secondly, these pills will permanently remove your severe emotion. This means it's clear there's no return from that. But thirdly, no strong emotion doesn't mean no emotion at all. This means there's still something that can make you happy. There's still like sadness and happiness in the process, but this emotion most likely can easily be moved on from the individual. So I think it's quite clear that you can still be happy with your friend, etc. What is important in things in the debate is on 2 folds. Number 1, which I'm able to show that the option, regardless of people will use it rationally or not, is principally important. And secondly, which I'm able to ensure the moment of taking option. With that, 4 contributions from opening government. Firstly, what's the severe harm from severe emotion because of 3 particular reasons. Number 1, humans have tendency to think only the worst case scenario, i.e. you always think about your recent losses instead of your recent win, because you think that the win that you have currently never being able to redeem your loss in the past, for example, so on and so forth. Number 2, it also looks like severe bad emotion usually happen because of the condition that you never eventually able to opt out, i.e. terminal illness that you eventually feel in the motion. Recently, for example, the recent loss of your family, and for example, so on and so forth. It is quite clear that you need a very long time to eventually change, for example, and most of the time you always think about this kind of severe negative emotion rather than other type of emotion. This is also why you can never eventually able to be happy, even if your family and friend come to visit you when you are sick, for example, thinking that you are a burden. You always have another opt-out mechanism or escapism, for example, to think that every good thing that's being done by other people is actually because of the negative thing that I've eventually done in my life, for example, or something along that line. Thirdly, it's also because of the existence of grief, for example, that even though within status quo you have friends, they're in the small counterbalance, for example, but the severe emotion is the moment that you can eventually really think whether or not those kind of smaller emotions is eventually also crucial. But second thing, do you need severe positive emotion? Not really, because of 4 particular reasons. Number 1, when the moment passes, it's become nostalgia. You wishing that your current moment will be as the same or as at least similar with the experience that you accessed in the past. This means on 3 things. Number 1, when other happy moment happen, you don't really able to eventually feel happy or even to some extent fulfilled, because you feel that the experience currently are not as same or at least similar to the experience that you eventually have back then, for example, or something along that line. Thirdly, is also have the tendency or keep on overthinking, keep on comparing your experience. Because you have severe positive emotion, it becomes your parameter of other type of happiness. This is why you become numb when you feel like ABP EFL final, because you don't break into open final, for example, or something along that line. Fourthly, it's also feeling of average emotion means, it also means that you cannot really evaluate the average emotion that exists. This is connected both with negative emotion and positive emotion, and this is crucial. Why is that? So, because you always evaluate only the severe emotion rather than evaluate what is the average emotion will eventually really give you upon, for example. And this is why individual never eventually able to eventually develop themselves apart from this kind of severe emotion. Example will be identity politics that being created in developing nation, for example, because there's severe connectivity and severe feeling that my past has been being oppressed or something along that line, or even to some extent, I'm the one that should push for Muslim majoritarianism in Indonesia, for example. I always opt into identity politics because I severely connected with this kind of emotion. This also means that you are unable to eventually rationally think what experience in the past able to eventually help you, for example, or something along that line. With that in mind, the conclusion is very simple. Severe positive and negative emotion is something that is not important and we should eradicate regardless of what happened. P1.
If X have terminal illness, will they just be like, oh, I'm gonna die lah?
Not related. Two things there. Number one, why that individual most likely take this in the rational position because of 4 particular reasons. Number one, you still have internal control mechanism. Emotion is not something that is practical, it's something that experienced individually and differently. And this is why most likely you have a huge amount of pessimism when other people say that you should take this pill and eradicate the strong emotion that you might feel in the future, for example. This pessimism question the authority because of there's no direct effect whatsoever that you feel right now. This means most likely you need to experience a certain severe emotion first before opting into these kind of pills as well. Secondly, this also means that family, that friends that care toward you also will rationally and try to calculously try to understand what is your position and whether or not taking the pills is eventually also crucial. Most likely you also have friends that taking this kind of pill that don't really have severe emotion, meaning that most likely he will try to think rationally as well because he are much more easily to being influenced by logical analysis or something along that line. Thirdly is also the existence of discussion because of 3 particular reasons. Number one, access of information between the state interest and obligation to eventually educate individual, especially where severe emotion or to some extent emotion to some extent is actually affecting how individual choose and individual evaluate themselves, meaning that they do have the interest to eventually educate the positive side and negative side from taking this kind of pill as well. Secondly is also about people that already take it, most of the time also means there's a certain experience that being discussed inside of Quora, inside of social media, for example, means that most likely you have the ability to eventually see the option, see what is the experience for an individual that taking this kind of pill as well. Fourth and lastly is also the question of like why then this is eventually happen, for example, something along that line. In the moment of grief, it means that you reevaluate whether or not something giving you meaning or not. If it does not giving you meaning and it continuously severely harming you as an individual, that means that most likely you eventually leave for a good option, taking this kind of option and leave this kind of severe emotion. The conclusion is very simple. Most likely individual taking it rationally, hence this kind of option sure eventually exists. Last argument of a principle of option. This is crucial. Why is that? Emotion is something that works differently from individual. My experience of having my grandmother die probably affect me differently with the experience of Marvin, for example, when his grandmother died. And because of this kind of different value attached toward individual, at least giving the option is the least that we can do. Because individual never have choices whatsoever to eventually opt into this kind of strong emotional feeling. Everyone want to experience a certain emotion, but severe emotion impact us differently in this particular case. What does it mean? It means that the option, it means that you need to have that option because you shouldn't be gaslighted in terms of what does this emotion eventually affect you as an individual. And this is what we see currently, massive in society, that when you get a certain grief, you are eventually told to move on, and you are being gaslighted. Probably it is not something that severe, why you keep on experiencing something like that. And this is why when the conservative parents told you, why you keep on crying about your grandmother, they told you that you should move on because this is something that doesn't matter anyway. Living in a happier condition or something along that line. And because of how you experience this is inherently different, opting out is the least we can do, especially where human never really choices to exist in the very first place. For those reasons, proud purpose.
For their final remarks, we would like to invite the Leader of Opposition to open the case for opposition. You're here. Alright, I thank the Leader of Opposition for their final remarks. We would like to invite the Deputy Prime Minister. You're here.
Check. Start in 3, 2, 1. Opening government is going to win this debate by proving two things. One, why will people make good decisions on our side? Secondly, why strong emotions is harmful for most of individuals. Firstly, why do people make good emotions? And I want to note that there are arguments about the capitalistic system that pressures people exist symmetrically on both sides. It is exactly on their world where people have no choice. They still are forced to work, they still are forced to be productive, but they cannot opt out of that mechanism when that is the only survival mechanism that individual might have. At least on our side, the option is there, the option is on the table, and that is when people make good decisions. Four mechanisms why people make good decisions on our side. Firstly, just like any medical procedures, there will be incentives for doctor, state, psychiatrists, even the medical community at large will make sure that this medicine is executed well. Just like people not taking chemotherapy in like one day making decisions, people take intense like psychological mechanism, for example, to ensure that the decision they are making is good. Secondly, their own mechanisms of family and support system will help them make decisions. They will give them advices, they will give them consultation, and all of this means that it's far more likely for them to make good decisions on our side. The delta is here. For people who do not have family, for people who cannot access psychologists on their side, is people who is going to be harmed the most and going to be helped the most on our side. When they are the lonely people that is left behind by their family, the only way for them to cope with life is this pill, is this only mechanism, as opposed to the alternative of psychologists and family that not everyone has the privilege of having in this current status quo. Thirdly, even existing patients will share things in their social media, will do interviews and whatnot, given the the extent and the large effect that this medicine has. Probably there will be incentive of sharing as well. But lastly, there is also internal mechanism, right? It's likely that you make the decision not if you are angry once. It's probably you things like you have felt grief multiple different times. You have grief for your grandmother, for your parents, for your friends, and you feel the same intense emotion repeatedly, and that is when you make that decision. When you feel that it's overly strong for you, that is when internal clocking mechanism will work. The conclusion of this is very simple. Individuals do not take this as a counter medicine that they buy in the nearest drugstore and take it one day. They make intense decision making that they go through different rational process in order to guarantee that this is something that's helpful, beneficial for them. So the first pathway to victory for opening government is clear. We show that this is productive, this is the individuals who need this medicine the most and that is going to use it in a good way. Opposition need to firstly disprove that people are going to use this in a good way, even before talking any principle people can be happy and whatnot. They need to show why people cannot access it in a good way. Second argument, why is strong emotion, no thank you, harmful for individuals? I want to posit 5 different things here. The first, by definition, strong emotions mean it's overclouding any other emotion. This means you cannot value any different emotions that you have in life. This one strong emotion is going to be overclouding and overpowering to that individual. What this means is, on a principle level, this is minimizing any sort of agency in the future that you have. Which means that if you cannot making this decision, helps you make better choices in the future, maximizing agency. In principle, this is a good medicine. But secondly, on practical, this makes people make better decisions in the first place. Unlike what they say that all people cannot make good decisions, you are actually going to have better decision-making process on our side at the point in which you do not your decision-making process is not overclouded by irrational, illogical things that is overcrowding your mind right now, but rather a more rational process that people can balance it out, value the measures and value the pros and cons of every decision making. Because for example, if you are sad, if you're in a very massive grieving process, you're not going to take things lightly, you're going to be very emotional and very sad, for instance. Other than comparative on our side, you're more likely to make good decisions on our side. Secondly, the argument about a check and balance. Firstly, this argument presumes that people can do the check and balance in a good way, which I just showed that they cannot make that good decision. So even if you need a closure from your girlfriend, or you need reparations, you're making that decision in a very emotional way rather than a very strategic and logical way. But secondly, oftentimes things like closure are often inaccessible for people either way. Victims of sexual harassment, trigger warning, for example, cannot access their closure on either side of the house, so probably they still need this pill in order for them to access closure and to access the sort of reparation that they want on their side. No, thank you. Secondly, people also cannot move on our side and be productive, just like what I pointed out in the opening, that people are still going to be forced by the capitalistic system either way. The difference is the degree of stigmatization. At the point in which this is a pill that you have to take, psychological treatment, counseling consulting process and all that become more normalized insofar as people are aware that this is an issue, when on their side the stigmatization towards mental health awareness, for example, is still prevalent and still is an issue that they haven't solved on their side. People are trapped in things like nostalgia and grief, and they cannot opt out of all this thing because exactly by their own reason. This is the only things that they can cling onto. The moment of happiness that they say is so important makes people fail to move on in status quo because they always gravitated towards their strong happy emotions and cannot enjoy the present moment with their family, for instance. This is important because the only moment when you need to feel happy is the moment when you're feeling the lowest at your life. If your life is normal, I think the strong emotion doesn't affect people in either side of the house. But when you're at the saddest, when you're at the most grieving process and when you're at the lowest position in your life, this is when that intense emotion makes you less productive because you keep on shuffling to that nostalgia. You think of the what ifs. You cannot move on in the healthiest manner possible.
At least under OO, people have strong incentive to do check and balance to the capitalistic system, i.e. demand work-life balance and human treatments when you still have strong emotion.
No, look at status quo. What human emotion is the capitalistic system is doing to our world. Like clearly there are no incentive, and you need to show structural reasons why the alternative is true. Lastly, note that the important last harm is that the harm of strong emotions doesn't only affect you as an individual, but also affect other people that is close to you in your life. Firstly, you might do things that is not within your intention, i.e. saying bad words when you're very angry, i.e. not listening to other people. You fail to acknowledge that there are different people that is giving you support, but you think that support means nothing because you cannot, you cannot value other people's existence in your life insofar you're very, very predominantly dominated by your current grief and your current sadness. But secondly, it also means that it is harder for you to empathize to other people's sadness and other people's emotion because now the standards and the parameter for what strong emotion is your own. It's your biggest value, is when your most intense emotion becomes the standard for which you value other people's emotion rather than being able to objectively see and empathize to other people's struggle equally as much as your struggle when you do not have that bias in the first place. And let's be clear, the comparative on our side is not that there is no emotion at all. Probably it is like when you're sad, you're only like sad for one day, then you can move on with your life. Rather than being sad and being predominantly dominated by grief for like 10 days or for even months and come back to that nostalgia on our side. Why is this better? The first reason is because now you are able to see the world or see your conditions in a more objective way. You can value things and weigh in a more reasonable way how it affects your life as opposed to just seeing things when you are most predominant by that emotion. Crucially, this pill provides option for people who are most vulnerable, for people who need it the most on our side. For all those reasons, this pill is good. We propose.
Right. I thank the Deputy Prime Minister for their final remarks. I'd like to invite the Deputy Leader of Opposition to close the opening half. Hear, hear.
Hi, am I audible? Okay, if you want to be away, just talk about it. And I would like to give several thanks. Thanks to Universitas Gadjah Mada for supporting us. Thanks to Indonesian Continent, especially also in addition, thank you for my girlfriend who is here to make me And lastly, thank you for nasi kandar pelita Jaya that makes my trip to Malaysia. If I win, give nasi kandar ya. Cool, thank you. Yeah, I'm gonna start my speech in 3, 2, 1. 3 issues in my speech. Firstly, let's talk about agency because the argument from OO is contingent on this being a good option. But they are backlashing their own characterization because they told you that they will have a different rational process, but they told you that the negative emotion overclouds any other emotion and therefore makes them unable to think about it rationally. This is why your ability, and therefore we told you that government can always limit your option when it comes to when your option is one very irrational and overwhelming you such as this emotion, and secondly harms you. This is why your ability to trigger warning, take your own life, can be limited by the government when it comes to harming yourself and not rational. Like for example, we have to limit euthanasia. We have to make safety rails in the second floor, for example, and we have suicide hotline in order to limit people's agency to do suicide because it can be deemed as irrational. This is why our characterization of limiting the ability to take this pill is exactly the one that gives you the agency and act as a check and balance, as a balancing mechanism of your overwhelming emotion that came from the negative emotion that pushes you to have this pill. And that is why our argument of agency matters more, and our argument about the harm of cognitive dissonance and so on and so forth, that is the harm of not having the strong emotion still stands. Therefore, agency done, they're not logical when they take this pill. But that's second issue. Talking about severe emotion and despair, this is why like having the strong emotion matters. Like I have two responses as to why having strong emotion is exactly good. One, we told you that there are check and balance to that severe negative emotion. We told you that strong positive emotion is also equally overwhelming. This looks like nostalgia when you remember the happiness in the past of, for example, eating grandma's cookies that makes you feel happy and the thing that your experience is worth it. Or secondly, your brain chemical that is positive is also overwhelming. Dopamine that intensify the happy experience, or the oxytocin that makes you have a certain bonding with a person, for example, that makes you feel like the suffering that you have is bearable. This is why we told you that it is fine for the people with terminally ill to experience that because there's a check and balance to that. But here's the flip to this. We told you that the intense emotion is the only reason to make the grief bearable. The problem in opening government is that even though the intense emotion is absent, the practical implication of the experience does not. How does that look like? It looks like when your grandma died, the absence of, although you don't feel like intense grief, the absence of a person who loved you still exists. When you terminally ill, this is my POI by the way, you know in fact that you will die. The fear that you will die in the future, for example, or the thinking that you will not exist in the future is still, for example, a negative emotion. Exactly, nostalgia and extreme excretion of dopamine is what exactly makes it bearable. Like for example, it is okay for me to be terminally ill. I can see my family and friends with me, and therefore that bonds that came from the oxytocin is good. Or for example, it's okay for me to have terminally illness right now. In the past, with my nostalgia, I already feel a good thing in life. Therefore, exactly, the positive emotion is the prerequisite for you to have the negative experience that has negative practical implication logically bearable. But thirdly, let's take the worst case scenario. That is, even if you will have a bad emotion. We told you that exactly having a bad emotion is good because in absence of that, you will have the cognitive dissonance. How does that look like? Let's analyze the timeline. No, thank you. 1. Prior to consumption, they told you that the use will be widespread. This will look like two folds. 1, the pharmaceutical company will advertise it as very safe, very good, and therefore people will use it. And there will also be a shift of the societal narrative that is, it is okay to take this is normal, this is a good way out, and so on and so forth. Therefore, this will create a perception that your emotion is not valid. When you feel sad, when you tell your friends that, oh, I feel sad, I feel this, that, you will be told that, hey, just take the pill, it's your sadness does not really matter, just erase it. Therefore, prior to not only that this is not consented, but prior to your consumption, your feeling will be constantly invalidated, and you will feel that you are alone. You will feel like no one cares about you, and that's what makes you feel alienated from the human kind. But secondly, post-consumption, we told you no thank you, that there is a huge practical harm of having no strong emotion, because you still have your memory intact of your past memories and how you felt in the past memories. Therefore, you will compare your current negative thing and how you feel, and compare it to the past negative experience and how you felt in the past. You will think, why am I feeling numb? But in the past, I feel such this strong emotion. And when you compare that, this is what makes you feel like an alien. This is what makes me feel like not a human. This is harmful internally and externally. Externally, you will be conceived as weird because not everyone will think this. But internally, Suddenly you will feel like as if you're not human, comparing yourself with the past human self. Before going further, let's do crossing.
If we have the pill, grief and terminal illness does not debilitate you from doing anything else. It means you fundamentally still have to function in society, as opposed to on your side you are debilitated.
When you're terminally ill, you're in bed, right? You cannot do anything. But like the nostalgia and the positive emotion that came from the nostalgia, dopamine, oxytocin, and so on and so forth is what makes it bearable, even when you are practically harmed. But thirdly, let's talk about the macro scale. How do we uplift the condition of the underprivileged? They told you that you cannot help the underprivileged anyway because you have to opt into the, for example, for example, the capitalistic system. One, we told you that the labor law exists to uplift the overreach of capitalistic system, even if it is at the cost of the productivity. So in the past, productivity has always been destroyed or compromised to protect the labor. But we told you that there are myriads of problems that cannot be solved with logical and utility because it will just create a majoritarian discriminative solution. This is why helping underprivileged and universal healthcare system does not make sense logically because the ROI that you get is like more little than the coverage that you give. Or affirmative action doesn't really matter. Improvement of labor protection doesn't really matter. And strong emotion is the only one that makes you feel like it is worth it to challenge the very strong actor. This is why we are very proud to it.
Right, I thank the Deputy Leader of Opposition and would like to invite the Member of Government to open the closing comments here.
Yeah, hi everyone. Shout out to people that have been there through me. I didn't name every single one of them. It would be a lie to say that everything has been handed to me on a silver spoon, but it would also be a lie that I did not work hard. We cannot take away community out of it. So thank you, the debating committee as a whole. I'll start in 3, 2, 1. What is lacking from opening? I think it creates lots of deadlock because they don't have overarching principle of analysis. If you realize, they base a lot of their arguments on examples. Things like, imagine if you lose your grandmother to a debilitated illness on OG or on OO. Imagine if you can still have nostalgia of past memories of that person. I think the logic of how those emotions interact in people and what is the difference between intense emotions is unclear. I think it's as if on opening, you are debating why emotions are bad and therefore you cannot rationalize, or as if bad emotions are something that is the main stage. Well, this is about you won't still be able to have emotions. So I think what is needed, therefore, and what is CG going to bring is the explanation of the function of emotions and why if the pill is taken and some people lose intense emotion, they can function just as well. I think therefore I will introduce 2 functions of emotions. A, emotions are there for you to put value into life, and second, emotions are there for the sake of social interaction. So first, I think the question is, if we say people don't have consent, which, yeah, sure, OJ explained that, but what they like is, why are we still insisting that the pill still lowers your emotion? Because their OJ's logic is as if you are born into this world without consenting to feel emotion, not really contextualized to intense emotions. So I think it's too general. So I don't think that's the main burden of the debate. The function of emotions, the first one, I think you need to learn the value of things. Example, you need to feel happy when you achieve something in life because it gives you value and you understand that I want to keep doing this, or like you understand that this is probably worth it investment. You also need to feel sad when you lost your family member because it signals to you that you value this person, that therefore losing them means everything to you. Therefore, it also means that the balance of good and sad emotion is needed. You cannot feel pleasure if you never understand the comparative of pain. So that's like the whole idea of emotions, how it gives you comparative into the things that value in your life. But the next question, right? Now, with that context, why should these people be accessible? I think if the whole point of emotions are to allow you to understand what are things you appreciate in life and what you don't, then intense emotions are first unnecessary. Because I think if the whole thing is, the whole point is to put value, you can still understand failures even if it's not an intense emotions. For example, even if the feeling that you get when you are when you finally achieve something that you have dreamt for so long, even if it's not intense, you can still understand that it means a lot to you. The same way that sadness, although it's not intense, still signals you things that matters to you. So I think you can live a balanced and a comparative life. What does this mean is that I think the overarching analysis of decision making from OG as to why therefore decision making are gonna be good. It's not necessarily because people become more rational, but I tell you that it's better because the kind of comparative that you get out of these either sad or happy emotions are gonna be a comparative that give you insight or value into your life. And I think the whole point of this debate or the whole point of this motion should be about the principle of life and how do people put meaning into life. To OO, it also responds to them saying that, oh, you need intense emotion as an accurate signal because they say certain things become, let's say, you value them differently, therefore you are not really understanding what it was. I don't think that's the case because the component of emotion are still there, albeit not intense. What does that mean? Is that it means, and experiencing that, you still have, let's say, negative emotion to you, which means that you feel uncomfortable, you know that you want to avoid that. The same way happiness, you know you want to keep getting that. So I don't really understand their idea of signals. But second is also because the second function, I think that was unnecessary and why we can still achieve failure or meaning in our life. But why is it to the point that it's harmful? I think that's because intense emotions mislead you into thinking what actually you value in your life. I think the idea of being comparative, we don't really get why, let's say, you need to feel such a devastating amount of tragedy to be able to understand an intense amount of happiness is meaningful to you. I don't think that's the case. So I think that's really harmful to force people to feel so much emotions and lose their capability to do that. The second function of emotions, second contribution, social interaction. And this also going to be my direct response to OO, talking about, there are going to be two demography, right? People who take the pill and people who do not take the pill and how would they interact. So social interaction, I think the idea of emotions and why it's needed is because you need to know the consequences of your actions to others. That things don't only have value to yourself, which is my second contribution, but it has value to other people. Which means that you need to understand the value of pleasure, let's say from hoarding resources, create value of pain to other people that does not get the resources. So I think it's the prerequisite of empathy, and that's why you need emotions. I think what OG fails to do so is they never explain why do intense emotion destroy this function of social connection. I will tell you, I think because when you are experiencing extreme emotion, it's hard for you to understand other people's condition. It's gonna be different from OG because their logic is that you cannot understand people's emotion because you cannot rationalize it. I think this debate isn't really about emotion versus rational because that would be as if you're regretting emotion as a whole. I think it's not because they become irrational, but because your emotional capacity has been full. Because we have a threshold to what extent can you experience emotion. That is why, let's say, people sometimes shut down, right? That's the reason because your threshold has been fulfilled. I think what happened with intense emotion, the reason why you cannot really connect or understand other people is because you have no other way of trying to understand their emotions when your own emotion has been overwhelming enough as it is. And I think this is the overarching principle of what it means of social connection. But what about interaction of people who take the pills and those who do not take the pills? I think those who take, people who don't take the pill is probably people who are either, it's really six, who are either born with innate, I don't know, some people are born experiencing less emotions, or second, maybe they have developed along the way an ability to control their intense emotions. That's why they don't take it. So I think the interaction between people who take it and who do not take it is gonna be quite similar, because people who don't take it is already people who don't really experience intense emotions, and people who take it are now gonna be on par with them. So I think if anything, it equalizes social interaction, and that's why you can understand each other better, because now you are operating on the same capacity of feeling emotion, and none of you are overwhelmed. So I think this is why this capacity of feeling and what it means for human is really important for CG, because we have explained to you all the basic functions of emotions and why intense emotion either unnecessary or destroyed it. propose.
I thank the member of government for their fine remarks. I would like to invite the member of opposition. You're here.
Hi. Let me briefly thank the debating committee as a whole, including the domestic and international one. I just thank to all the people who kindly accommodate us to the kind of spouse, at other competitions. Thesis of closing opposition is extremely simple. First, we argue that objective happiness comes prior to the subjective happiness. But secondly, we will ensure the objective happiness, especially for the most vulnerable, and we will win this debate with such metric. I have a couple responses to the closing government before moving on to the framing and extensions. Two things. The first, they say that on the first thing that they point out is that fluctuation emotions still happen to a certain degree, even on the closing, even on ours, probably in the both sides of the house. I think this particular point is just true, but the difference here is the degree of the emotion that people are likely to feel, obviously. Therefore, the kind of impulse to go up against the government at the expense of the kind of risking their life, for example, such as kind of radical action, oftentimes drive by extreme emotion is something less likely to happen on their side of the house. But secondly, they say that the intense emotion can incapacitate people from emphasizing with other people. I have a couple of responses to this. First, even intense emotion is not something that people feel constantly. Oftentimes, the intense emotion goes slower and lower as time goes by. Oftentimes, majority of people spend majority of their lifetime with the relatively kind of less fluctuation emotions. I don't necessarily understand why intense emotion necessarily dictates people's mind for all the time. Therefore, the kind of scale of harm is something incredibly limited. But secondly, the difference in both sides of the house is that most vulnerable people are likely to take this bill out of the severe kind of oppression or kind of discrimination that they are facing. Therefore, most vulnerable people are likely to opt in this particular view, and they are unlikely to feel the strong emotions at the end of the day. This is the kind of premise for our extensions. So before moving on to our extension, I have 4 points of framing to say. The first thing that I want to point out, that even on the side of opening governments, the most vulnerable people are likely to feel or are likely to objectively unhappy due to a couple of reasons. Firstly, they are still mentally and physically, materially, physically insecure. Take a look at example of abusive relationship. There's a trigger warning. So the people feel kind of punished, abused by their kind of girlfriend, for example, are still likely to be in these particular conditions, even if they are subjectively content this kind of situation, right? When we talk about, for example, family in extreme poverty are likely to be in the most poverty situations that they can't put for a table on the to begin with, even if they feel like this kind of situation is still okay. Therefore, objective suffering that they are facing in the status quo are likely to exist even on their side of the house, even if that is not perceived by the people on the ground. But second thing that I want to note is that even if opening government advances the claim of options, but the note that whether we should regulate or prefer this particular option exists or not is ultimately based on the pragmatism. For example, states will regulate or limit the option to the abusive or addictive drug for the reasons that which make people's life objectively unhappier. Therefore, therefore, fundamental question that we needed to ask within this way is that whether this particular pill make people substantially objectively better or not. If it is not, states intervene as we do to the drugs or other kind of addictive options that states are currently restricting in the status quo.
Point.
But next thing that I'm going to take around 5 minutes. But next thing that I want to point out is that Yeah, objective happiness comes prior to the subjective happiness. This is due to the two reasons. Firstly, oftentimes people prefer to live with the truth, and people prefer the objective happiness. Take a look at the experiments, thought experiment of experience machine. People oftentimes do not opt into the experience machine, even if that machine makes people constantly happier for the reason that people is not inherently utility chasing to begin with. But secondly, oftentimes subjective happiness is something untrustable. Take a look at the example of adaptive preferences. Children in the poor family does not necessarily have a hope to go to the college. This is not because they inherently don't want to go to the college, but because their family situation means that they will, the severe poverty situation in the family means that they will incentivize them to work harder for their family instead of going to college. But such kind of subjective kind of opinion that people have is oftentimes formed by external environmental factors, and people do not necessarily see that the kind of adaptive or subjective preference is not something that we should put trust on to begin with. Therefore, objective happiness is something that people are likely to prioritize to begin with. Here's our arguments. We think that a strong emotion is a prerequisite for the kind of societal progress, which make people objectively happier in many respects. Before moving to the next session, is there any POI from the opening?
Happiness become less accessible on your side at the point in which the threshold for that happiness becomes extreme on your side. When on our side, you can feel happy even for the smallest instances.
Yeah, that thing that points out that a subjective yes, okay, even yours, I gotta take the best case OZ. It is true that people might be subjectively happy at the end, but a fundamental question that we need to answer is whether this particular view makes people objectively happier. And as I told you before, this comes prior. Why is people are likely to objectively happy due to the stagnation of the social movements? The first thing that I want to point out is a social movement, a strong emotion is the prerequisite for the any kind of social movements to begin with. No, thank you. I'm gonna take no POI. But second, the first reason is that logical kind of thinking with less intense emotion necessarily discounts the future benefit, because future benefit is speculative. Therefore, people are unlikely to take risk on their side of the house. But secondly, oftentimes social movement is the probability of success is extremely low due to a lot of exogenous factors. Therefore, people, especially the social activists, are unlikely to take actions, especially they don't have an impulse to do this. Why this particular societal change is more likely to happen in our side of the house? There are two mechanisms for this. Opening opposition just say we can challenge this, but we gotta mechanize this. Firstly, they can, especially social activists, can take a disproportionate risk at the expense of losing their life. For example, there are so many black Americans who are approaching or going rally at the government at the expense of they might be shot by the police, or they might receive a tear gun from the police, for example. But secondly, there are more people around the minority are more likely to opt in this kind of social movement, even if they risk themselves to the oppression by the government, etc. The reason why this particular thing is exclusive to our side of the house is the reason why oftentimes impulse emotion is a prerequisite to take these particular actions. What is the kind of delta that we have in our side of the house? Firstly, people are likely to have much more audacious action which builds to the massive societal progress. We are talking about the Greta or Mada or Cancer Jr., which substantially improve the people on the ground. Even if the discrimination happens, this substantially decreases. For example, in South Africa, we see a little bit kind of granting more rights to the black, and their living conditions substantially improving compared with the era of apartheid. This kind of marginal change is more likely to happen in our side of the house. But secondly, people in general are more likely to opt. So why this particular impacts outweighs all the impacts of the side of is this particular argument important? Firstly, we will make people's life objectively happier. On their side of the house, they are locked up in this kind of situation. They don't have access to the social movement to begin with. But secondly, we have a much more larger scale of happiness or larger scale of the kind of change in our side of the house. Opening opposition just asserts that some individual might be happier, but the kind of change that we can have is much more intense, and given the most vulnerable people, the most crucial actor and opening opposition fail to protect. And we're gonna drop the case of opening government for all those reasons. Very happy to propose.
Alright, I thank the member of opposition for their kind remarks. I would like to invite the government whip to close the case for the gov bench. Here, sir.
Check. Before I start, this is my first international major, and just being in the final here with an amazing teammate who's had also the privilege of debating in several majors before, sharing the stage with people who I admire from my own country, Hans, Marvin, Terre, as well as people amazing people who I met in this competition from Closing Opposition. It truly is an honor to be here. I hope my speech is motion justice as a psychology major and as someone who intensely feels emotions myself, right? Starting. Ideally thinking of POI from opening for cross-bench engagement, just do so broadly. Starting in 3, 2, 1. I'm going to engage in 3 benches. First CO, then OO, last OG. Let's talk CO. I think closing opposition, we're unable to engage and compare why emotions are fundamentally important to relations, insofar as their benefit and their scope of harm only extends to the individual. When closing gov are the only theme that truly expands the scope of this debate into a social interaction as well, and how that influences you as an individual, right? Why is this contribution significant, and why does closing opposition fall out of this virtue? This is crucial because when we tell you the scope of the debate goes beyond the individual, that means that closing opposition benefit is marginal at best, insofar as you only influence the people that experiences the emotion, but the function of emotion itself, as member of Gov has already explained, also expands to the extent of how you interact with another person, right? So I think closing opposition's idea of objective emotions are inherently contradictory at best, right? I think emotions are inherently a subjective signal to what you value in life, insofar as you don't exactly have a metric of what you can value and what you cannot value in life, and therefore I think member of Gov is also a member of opposition is also unable to engage on an individual level of contribution as well, right? So 2 ways on why we go over CO. Check. 2 ways on why we go over CO. 1, on a social scale. I think this is important. Emotions being reasonable allows you to have a better understanding. I think this is why the extension of societal progress, and I think both opposition bench posit about how capitalism is a fundamentally, the emotions fundamentally hamper the progress of in capitalistic society, etc. I think this progress idea of closing opposition is inexclusive because we can tell you that change can happen when there's a better understanding. It means that when, for example, individuals riot on the street, there is a level of understanding that even politicians who are disenfranchised from society can sell, because you are reasonably feeling these emotions, because the way you express them is also reasonable. It means that you have a better level of understanding insofar as even people on top understand why you feel the emotions that you feel, and people on top understand the comparative of what they feel versus what the people on the bottom feel, and therefore that kind of societal progress can still happen. I think that's largely an exclusive idea of closing opposition. But second way, even on an individual scale, the scale of happiness therefore becomes irrelevant on closing opposition. Why? Because it therefore comes at the cost of sadness. I think it's important to characterize that emotions exist in a spectrum, right? What we do is we limit that spectrum into a reasonable and rational extent. Insofar as when you're happy, you're not overly happy. When you're sad, you're not overly sad. Their benefit is exclusively happening when you are very, very happy. I don't think that's a very valid trade-off to make when you realize that people in society are inherently harmed by extreme portions of sadness. When people even if they're extremely happy, are fundamentally invalidated exactly because their emotions that they experience are too crazy or too happy, right? We don't want to invalidate those people more. So even on an individual scale, you can value your life better exactly when it is reasonable, because your comparative is also reasonable. That's why member of Gov contribution matters so much with respect to CO. Let's talk OO though. It's as if you defend emotions, and we agree that emotions are fundamentally important, right? But we don't want to eliminate them altogether. We prove to you how the harm exists only when emotions are intensified. What does this mean? Opening opposition's challenge is inherently invalid. They try to claim how mental health access is going to be improved in leader of opposition. No, this house prefers a world motion, opposition stance and counterfactual defense status quo. That does not exist. We think that incentive structures prove that realistically mental health access, etc., is largely inaccessible. It means that our harms are still more tangible on our side. Let's talk about it, right? They tell you how there are check and balances. We tell you that is untrue, because none of that works in status quo, because people still still suffers are still invalidated. We tell you that the comparative of emotion on our side will be fundamentally reasonable, i.e., I am exactly happy that I'm speaking in the EFL Grand Finals of ABP because exactly I know what it feels like to break second in NUDC and then fall out in the Octo Finals, right? So exactly these kinds of emotions and exactly these kinds of invalidations are what helps you, what harms you on the opposition, and what helps you compare and be able to feel happiness on your side. Insofar as I think opening opposition have not been able to engage into how important it is to have a reasonable comparative when interacting with others. I think interactions will be more reasonable on our side, and that creates a better understanding of how you're able to perceive interactions with other people, right? It means that opening opposition's probable harm of capitalism does not accrue on their side, and we tell you how comparatively it is still more important for you to have a better comparative and have a better understanding when you're able to have a reasonable amount of emotion. Opening.
The prerequisite of an empathy is a showcase of a strong emotion that everyone can relate to the magnitude, unlike practicalities that not everyone is experiencing.
We tell you that when your comparative is reasonable instead of extremely unreasonable, it allows people to relate to it better. It means that when you're sad, you simply cry instead of you shutting yourself out of the world for 3 days, right? It means that when your comparative is reasonable, it allows you to have a better understanding as well. This is what member of government has explained. Opening opposition's view has been responded to. Let's talk OG. I think opening government fundamentally lack humanization in this debate, and I think that's fatal. We do credit them for providing the principle of options, but I think it still lacks exclusivity, and as to why this is the only principle that matters in the debate. This is why they fail to respond to OO. The framing is simple. Although opening government explained that people do not consent to feeling intense emotions, I think it still brings the question as to why exactly that consent is not applicable to emotions as a whole, as opposed to just the extreme spectrums of emotions, right? Since exactly, we never consent to being born, so CG's principle of intense emotion being harmful towards people is not only better contextualized the emotion, but better engages into upbenches harm that they posit, right? I think open government failed to contextualize why people are likely to perceive their own emotions in a positive way. With the pill, we prove to you how that helps you with relations to others. We prove to you how that helps you with you being able to attach more meaning with your life. So I think that clearly opening government is lacking on 2 things. 1, proving who is likely to use the pill in the first place, but secondly, the function of emotion for people. I think OG's principle is exclusively valued when you realize how important it is to see how important emotions are to people. I think member of Gov exclusively proves that. But secondly, even if you credit opening government's practical, I think OG's benefits cannot accrue if CG does not explain first how it doesn't harm the innate function of emotions. What does this tell you? The weighing is extremely simple, panel. None of opening government's contributions matter without the contextualization to the debate that CG gives to you. When we tell you that we are fundamentally more engaging into up-benches scenarios, when we tell you that we expand the scope of the debate, this means that this contribution coming from CG is fundamentally round-winning, proud to propose and speak in the grand final.
Right, I thank the government whip and would like to invite the opposition whip to close the debate. Here. Hi, my name is Nanako, and this is the first time major international debate in If you have POI, please provide, use your mic, and I'll take a POI around 5 minutes. Okay. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. We will win this debate in terms of certainty and in terms of vulnerability and in terms of larger of the urgent speech in 3, 2, 1. We will win this debate in terms of certainty, in terms of vulnerability, and in terms of larger number of the impact. We will win this debate. Okay. First of all, I will talk about why the government side, why the OG, in terms of the OG, is unlikely to happen in terms of the more rational situations. Because in terms of some cases, even though they are the rationals, they are forced to be into that irrational situations. For example, due to the poverty, they will still stop from the shops, even though they know that really the situation is really irrational or have the risk of being arrested or something like that. Is there any benefits? It's no. And is it rational or no? In that situations, that impact is really unlikely to happen, and moreover, it is not exclusive in their side of the house. Therefore, those kind of more rational situations is unlikely to happen in terms of mechanism. And moreover, I will talk about, let me clarify that what is the more vulnerable character in this debate. The whole government side said, the more social interactions is really the better, and it's really get into better in their side of the house. But I think there are two responses to the government side. First, the number of the impacts. That when do you get really angry? When do you feel when are you really furious in that societies? So that number is really small. In that situations, the social better social interactions, it's really the number is really smaller in our side of the house. The impacts. For example, LGBTQ problems, for example, the minority black people problems or something like that, they are suffering from that situation. And moreover, the impact, that intensity of the impacts is really much deeper in our side of the house. I have to give her 5 minutes. And in terms of LGBTQ or in terms of black people, that situation is really harmful. For example, the social movement is here, and in the society. It's that's why they have the really strong feelings to those kind of issues. For example, they are discriminated or in the society, in the classmates or in the class situation or something like that. And moreover, they can get married with someone they love or something like that. In that situations, they will have the really strong feelings to do social movements or to do voice out that situations or something like that. In that situations, the social interactions, they can talk with more rationally, or they can talk without arguing with another person or something like that. That is a really impact. It's really smaller than the other side of the house. That really LGBTQ problems or black people problem or something like that. And moreover, the number of the people is really larger than in our side of the house. For example, as I said before, the times you arguing with another person is really smaller, but in the society, in the world, that suffering, that those people who are black people, that who are the really LGBTQ, is really consists on the really larger proportion in the society. For example, in the Africa, in the Japan, so really they are the really conservative countries or something like that. In that situations, the most vulnerable people, in terms of intensity of the impact or in terms of the number, that character is really minorities, such as the black people, such as the really LGBTQ people who are suffering from the situations. In that situations, the arguments that even if we take their best case, the social mobility, social interaction is going to be better, or they can talk with another person without feeling or furious with another person, without arguing with another person. That is a really small impact in our side than the other side of the house. And moreover, therefore, in their side of the house, object happiness really doesn't change. But their side of the house, the subject happiness, in terms of subject happiness, they will be happier in our side of the house. But what is important things is opening up, what is important things is object happiness is really more important than the subjective happiness, because as I said before, in terms of number, in terms of intensity, that in terms of the vulnerability, that impact from the government side is really lacking in the mechanisms. Okay, I'll take a POI from the opening.
The rise of majoritarianism and minority oppression rooted on severe emotional attachment for majority regime, identity, or even religion. In our side, people can think more logically and objectively that these oppressing people, the prerequisite for changing structure. Please engage with Uji.
Like, even if like the minorities can talk really rationally or can talk really like more moderate situations, there are less people like who pay attention to them, because like that's in that status quo there are no people, there are less people who are caring about those kind of things. Therefore, like in terms, even if we take the best case, they can be moderate, they can be more moderate. The number of the people who paid attention to them is getting smaller and smaller. Therefore, like the impact is really smaller than the our side of the house, even if we take their best case. And moreover, in terms of the OO, in terms of CC, like they can like have the better, like as I say, for the social interaction is really like getting better and better. But like those kind of impact is really smaller than the other side of the house. And moreover, those impact is not mutually exclusive, because like we can like in that status quo, the more like we can talk about that situation, social interaction is going to be like proceeded to be better. It's really that situation is happening in our side of the house. Therefore, like even if they take their best case, like the number or the intensity is really smaller than the our side of the house. And moreover, like that in terms of what is the important, so therefore like through this debate, what is important things is like that they will like that we should care about that LGBTQ or the black people or the really minorities community. And moreover, like even if we take their best case, even if the impact is really like huge in our like in their side of the house, that like impact or that like the situations they can get is really like not important. And moreover, like it is really not like smaller in our side of the house. Therefore, like very happy to propose oppose motion.